There's a 14-story luxury hotel sitting in a Texas town of just 15,000 people. 14 stories. Clark Gable stayed there. Judy Garland stayed there. And it's been rotting, broken windows and all, since 1972. Here's the thing. I actually drove past this exact building a few months back, half asleep on I-20, radio cutting in and out, when this thing just appeared out of nowhere on the horizon, in a town that small. I pulled over. Turns out there's a $65 million restoration that keeps getting delayed, and the town around it has been quietly losing people for over a decade, which, weirdly, is good news if you're living on a fixed income. And that's not the only strange one. What do a bison herd, a Pulitzer Prize, and a polygamist compound have in common? Nothing, except all three are sitting in tiny Texas towns where you could buy a house for less than most people pay for a used car. We're counting down 12 of them. And if forgotten places like this genuinely fascinate you, hit subscribe now. Because by the time we hit number 1, you're going to see a building so out of place in its own town, it looks almost fake. I promise you, it's real. Number 10. La Mesa. La Mesa is the kind of town where, if you roll your window down in October, you can actually smell it before you see it. That raw, almost sweet smell of cotton running through the gins around the clock. That's not nostalgia talking. That's just what fall sounds and smells like out here on the South Plains. This town got started in 1903 as a railroad stop, and for decades it ran on two things: cotton and, later, oil. Population peaked back in the 60s when both industries needed actual hands to run them. Then, machines got better at picking cotton than people, and the oil jobs drifted toward Midland Odessa, and La Mesa just settled. Not collapsed. Settled. And honestly, that's why it works for what we're talking about today. A lot of the housing stock here sits well under 6 figures. Grain elevators on the skyline, a modest little downtown, irrigation circles stretching out to the edge of what you can see. It's not flashy. Here's my honest take. La Mesa isn't going to show up on anyone's bucket list. It's not trying to. The people who live here are mostly the same families who've been here for generations, plus the occasional retiree who figured out that nobody's bidding wars are happening in Dawson County. That quiet is the whole pitch. It's an unassuming way to open this list. But stick around, because the towns get a lot stranger from here. Number 9. Seymour. Seymour is one of those rolling plains towns where a downtown storefront might have changed hands exactly twice since the Eisenhower administration. And the people who run them now will tell you that like it's a point of pride, not a problem. It started in the 1870s as a frontier settlement near old Fort Belknap, then grew up as a railroad and ranching town, and at one point it even claimed to host the first World Championship rodeo back in 1896. Pecos disputes that, by the way, and honestly, the two towns have been quietly arguing about it for over a century. The decline here wasn't dramatic. No single factory closed. No mine collapsed. It was slower than that. Farm consolidation, ranching mechanization, kids leaving for Lubbock or Abilene and just not coming back. That's the harder kind of decline to film, if I'm being honest, because there's no single broken window to point the camera at. What you get instead is a limestone courthouse square, big old shade trees lining grid streets of frame houses, and property taxes that run noticeably below the state average. The exact home prices are tricky to pin down. Small-town inventory means small sample sizes, but the pattern's consistent everywhere you look. I'll say this plainly. Towns like Seymour are the backbone of this whole list. They're not viral. They're just affordable, on purpose, by accident, by attrition, however you want to frame it. Number 8. Brownwood. Brownwood's got something a lot of these towns don't: a lake. Lake Brownwood, specifically, pine-shaded and a short drive from downtown, which is the kind of amenity that'd cost you a premium in most states and barely registers as a selling point here. Founded back in 1858, Brownwood grew through ranching, and then, in the World War II years, through Camp Bowie, a training base that briefly swelled the area's population into the tens of thousands. When the base closed in 1946, the town didn't vanish, but it did exhale. Slowly. Over decades. Manufacturing eroded the way manufacturing does everywhere in small-town America, piece by piece, plant by plant. What's left now is a regional hub. Howard Payne University, a hospital, a walkable red brick downtown that still functions like a real downtown instead of a museum piece. Cost of living trackers put it meaningfully below the national average, and I'd trust that more than I'd trust a single dollar figure right now, because those numbers shift fast. Here's the detail that got me, though. Out in the fields around town, there are still concrete slabs from Camp Bowie, foundations, just sitting there, grown over, holding the shape of barracks that housed 50,000 soldiers once upon a time. Nobody tore them out. Nobody built over them either. They just stayed. That's kind of Brownwood in a sentence. Nothing dramatic happened here. It just quietly kept being affordable while everyone was looking somewhere else. Number 7. Sonora. Sonora's got a story I genuinely did not expect. The whole town burned down. Well, half of it. A fire in 1902 wiped out nearly every business on the Strip, and instead of rebuilding with wood again, the merchants who could afford it rebuilt in native limestone. And a lot of those same buildings? Still standing, still in use. The town quite literally rose out of its own rubble using the rock under its feet. It started in 1889 when a rancher named Charlie Adams gave away free lots just to get people to settle here, and it became Sutton County seat the following year. Wool and mohair, that's sheep and goat ranching, for anybody who's never heard those terms, built the local economy, backed up by a Texas A&M research station that opened in 1916. Today, the median home value sits right around $157,000. Homeownership runs above 75%, and the median household income is close to $79,000. That's a documented number, not a guess, and it's a genuinely livable spread if you're on a fixed income. Diners, a grocery store, Friday night football, the usual rhythms of a working ranch town along I-10. Honestly, Sonora doesn't get talked about nearly enough. It's stable in a way that's almost boring on camera, but boring is kind of the whole point when you're trying to make a retirement check last. Number 6. Ozona. Crockett County peaked at around 5,000 people back in the late 1980s. Today, it's under 3,000, and it lost almost 8% of that just since 2020. That's not a slow leak. That's one of the fastest population drops of any county in the entire state, happening right now, not in some textbook. Ozona grew up as a ranching and oil field service town, sitting alone out there on I-10 between Austin and El Paso. And there was never really one big collapse to point to. No mine that shut down on a specific date. It's just been a steady, structural drain of young people leaving for bigger cities and never coming back. What's left is genuinely close-knit. A chamber of commerce with 240 members in a county this small tells you something. One hardware store recently merged with a competitor instead of fighting over a shrinking customer base, which honestly says more about this town's character than any statistic could. That's not failure. That's two businesses being smart about a hard reality. A local rodeo announcer who moved here decades ago put it best. You have to actually like it out here to live here. And look, that's not for everyone. But if you do like the quiet, the math works heavily in your favor right now in a way it just doesn't in most of Texas. Coming up next, a hotel so respected it's been named the best small hotel in the entire state, sitting in a town you could practically miss blinking. Quick thing before we keep going. The next 6 towns get a lot stranger than the first 6. One of them is tied to a national news story you probably remember. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's genuinely the time, because what's waiting at number 1 is not what you're expecting. Number 5. Marathon. Marathon has 410 people in it. 410. And it contains the Gage Hotel, named the number 1 small hotel in all of Texas by Texas Highways magazine. Sit with that for a second. A town smaller than most high schools, and it's home to one of the most acclaimed hotels in the state. A rancher named Alfred Gage commissioned it in 1927 as his office and lodging house. He died a year later. The hotel sat empty for decades after that. Actually empty, not metaphorically, until 1978, when someone finally bought it and brought it back, reopening in 1982. The town's population has barely moved since, hovering in the 400s for over 20 years now. Not declining, not growing, just holding. It functions today as the eastern gateway to Big Bend National Park, about 42 miles out. Art galleries, a small grocery, low adobe buildings under what might be the darkest, most star-saturated sky in the state. Locals half-jokingly call it the Un-Marfa. And yeah, that tracks. Same desert beauty, none of the Instagram crowd. Here's my honest opinion. Marathon shouldn't work as a hidden gem, because everybody already knows the Gage. But the town around it stayed small and stayed cheap anyway. And that contradiction, famous hotel, anonymous town, is exactly why it earns its spot here. Number 4. Big Spring. Picture this. Pigeons. Just pigeons, nesting for over 20 years inside a 15-story Art Deco hotel that used to be the tallest building between El Paso and Fort Worth. That's what happened to Hotel Settles after it closed in 1982. It sat there, broken and bird-filled, until a restoration finally reopened it in December of 2012. Big Spring built itself on a natural spring, then ranching, then a 1920s oil boom that paid for that very hotel. World War II brought a second wave through Webb Air Force Base, which trained over 9,000 pilots before it shut down in 1978. A real gut punch to the local economy that the town had to absorb all at once. What anchors Big Spring now isn't oil or the railroad. It's the VA Medical Center, opened in 1950, still serving veterans across 47 counties. That's a specific, deliberate draw for veteran retirees, and it's one most lists like this completely overlook. And here's the detail that stuck with me. Bob Wills's son still plays Texas Swing in a venue that, according to locals, hasn't changed since his father played there in 1973. Wait, let me say that again, because it's worth repeating. Same room, same music, 50-some years later. Big Spring's got grit, refinery stacks, wind turbines, pump jacks, and then this one restored Art Deco tower rising up out of all of it like it doesn't belong. Honestly, that contrast is the whole appeal. Number 3. Pecos. Pecos claims the world's first rodeo, July 4th, 1883, and for a few decades after that, this place was genuinely lawless. The kind of frontier town where gunfights were just a Tuesday. That history is real and well documented, not folklore dressed up for tourists. It grew as a Texas and Pacific Railway depot then exploded through irrigated cotton, onion, and cantaloupe farming. Pecos cantaloupe used to mean something across the entire state. Before 2002, Texas farmers planted over 10,000 acres of the stuff. Today, around 2,000. That's the lowest level since the 1920s. A sulfur mining bust in the 90s, and oil and gas pulling water and labor away from agriculture did the rest. Here's a detail that genuinely surprised me. Pecos was also the hometown of Billy Saul Estes, whose 1962 fraud scandal got broken by a local newspaper reporter who won a Pulitzer Prize for it and caused a shakeup at the entire U.S. Department of Agriculture. A tiny West Texas farm town, briefly at the absolute center of a national scandal. Today, more than 40,000 oil field workers commute through Pecos weekly, over double the resident population. Home values genuinely vary by source here, somewhere between roughly $109,000 and $282,000 depending who's counting, so take any specific number with a grain of salt until you check current listings yourself. I'll be honest, Pecos doesn't feel sleepy. It feels like a town still working, just working on smaller margins than it used to. Number 2, El Dorado. This one's heavier than the rest, so let me just say it straight. In April of 2008, Texas Child Protective Services removed more than 400 children from a ranch just outside this town, the headquarters of Warren Jeffs' polygamist sect. It made international news. The property was finally sold off and closed in 2018. That's not folklore. That's documented fact, and it's the reason a lot of people outside Texas have actually heard of El Dorado at all. But here's what nobody mentions after the headlines fade. This is, underneath all of that, just a ranching county seat founded in 1895, built on goats, cattle, and sheep. The population has dropped about 20% since 2010, down to under 1,600 people, driven by drought, rising feed costs, and Baker Hughes pulling its oilfield services office out in 2020. That building still sits empty in town, a literal, physical monument to the jobs that left. This part still doesn't sit right with me, honestly. A town quietly trying to rebuild its identity around wind energy and ranching, while most people who've heard of it only know the one dark headline from 2008. Both things are true at once. That's just how small towns work sometimes. Real estate here is genuinely affordable. Exact current numbers need a fresh pull before you trust them. But the population decline alone tells you the math favors a fixed income. One more town left before the one I promised you at the very start. Number 1, Mineral Wells. Mineral Wells, Palo Pinto County. Population around 15,000. And right in the middle of it stands a 14-story, 232,000 square foot hotel that has been mostly empty since 1972. Let me back up, because this story deserves it. In 1922, the people of this town raised $150,000 of their own money, not outside investors, not a corporation, their own money, to build a grand hotel around the mineral water that made the town famous. It opened in 1929, just weeks after the stock market crashed. Clark Gable stayed there. Judy Garland stayed there. There's a persistent rumor that Bonnie and Clyde once did too. I want to be clear, that one's folklore, not fact. But it stuck around for a reason. During World War II, a nearby training camp swelled the town's population to nearly 30,000 people, with soldiers and families filling that hotel night after night. Then the war ended. The camp closed in 1946, and the slow bleed started. Antibiotics made taking the waters medically pointless. The hotel closed for good in 1972 and just sat there. Broken windows, Pigeons. Decades of it. Here's the part that gets me every time. There's a weekly ghost tour now, led by a local woman named Angela Morgan, and it draws crowds of about 150 people who are, in her words, guaranteed to leave with orbs, apparitions, fogs, mists. The town's biggest economic failure is now its most reliable tourist draw. People drive here specifically to look at the thing that didn't make it. A $65 million restoration has been promised, delayed, re-promised. Currently aimed at 2028, after missing 2022 and 2024 before that. Downtown's quiet by 10 p.m. most nights. One restaurant. A handful of locals who never stopped believing the baker would come back. And meanwhile, housing here sits well below what you'd pay almost anywhere else in North Texas, in a town that's lost population for over a decade while everything around it boomed. That's the whole promise of this list in one place. A town nobody's watching, holding on to something nobody else has, waiting quietly for somebody to notice. Which, I guess, is exactly what you just did. If even one of these towns made you feel something, curiosity, sadness, that itch to just pack a bag and go look for yourself, drop the town name in the comments so I know which one actually hit. Share this with the one friend who's always talking about disappearing off the grid someday because they need to see Marathon or Quitak specifically. And the subscribe button sitting right there, waiting, same as that hotel in Mineral Wells. Except this one, you can actually do something about today.